billionaire thought mocking a cleaner's child would make him look powerful, but he didn't expect it to cost him $500 million. Boston, Massachusetts. A city built on power, history, and wealth. But inside one of its tallest glass towers, a single sentence would change everything. "It's a servant's kid," a billionaire sneered. The words hung in the air like poison. In that moment, a $500 million deal began to unravel, not because of numbers or contracts, but because of something far deeper. In a corner of the boardroom sat Maya, just 10 years old, clutching her crayons as if they were her shield. She wasn't supposed to be there. She wasn't supposed to matter. But what happened next proved that character, not money, decides the future. This is the story of how a billionaire lost everything, how a little girl's silence became louder than his empire, and how one family's quiet dignity toppled a giant. Just before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. We love seeing how far these stories reach. And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss tomorrow's special video. Now let's jump back in. Enjoy the story. A little girl's silence in a grand room held more power than a billionaire's fortune. She was there because her mother had to clean the floors, but she would leave after cleaning the entire room of its pride. The city of Boston woke up slowly, the sun stretching its golden fingers over brick buildings and quiet streets. In a small, tidy apartment filled with the scent of lemon polish and brewing coffee, 10-year-old Maya sat at the kitchen table. Her blonde hair was neatly braided, falling over the shoulder of her simple blue dress. She carefully colored a picture in her book, her small hands steady. Her lines were precise, staying inside the drawing of a mighty castle with a tall, protective wall. Her mother, Helen, moved around the kitchen with a quiet efficiency. Helen was a woman whose hands told the story of her life, strong, capable, and a little tired. She worked as a cleaner for one of the city's most powerful corporations, Thornton Industries. Today was different, though. A Saturday. The school was closed for a teacher's workday, and the neighbor who usually watched Maya had the flu. So, Maya was coming with her. "Are you ready, my little star?" Helen asked, her voice soft as she placed a piece of toast on a plate for Maya. Maya looked up and smiled, a gentle, bright smile that always made her mother's heart feel a little lighter. "Yes, Mama." Helen sat down for a moment, her gaze lingering on her daughter. Maya was a quiet child. She didn't speak much, but she saw everything. Her eyes, a deep and thoughtful blue, seemed to understand things most children her age didn't. Helen often thought Maya had an old soul, a quiet strength that reminded her of family stories passed down through generations. "You'll have to be very quiet today, sweetheart," Helen said, stroking Maya's braid. "The office is usually empty on Saturdays, but Mr. Thornton has a very important meeting. I just need to make sure the main conference room is perfect before his guests arrive." "The big glass room on the top floor?" Maya asked, her voice barely a whisper. "That's the one," Helen confirmed. "You can sit in the corner with your coloring book. You'll be so quiet, they won't even know you're there." Maya nodded. She was good at being quiet. She preferred it. She liked to watch and listen, to see how the world worked without making a sound. As they got ready to leave, Helen paused in front of a small, framed photograph on the wall. It showed a woman in a crisp military uniform, her expression firm but her eyes kind. "Who is that again, Mama?" Maya asked, though she already knew the answer. She loved the story. "That," Helen said with a soft pride, "is your great-aunt Catherine, my grandmother's sister. She was a hero." Maya looked at the picture. Great-aunt Catherine looked strong. Not loud or flashy, but solid, like the foundation of a house. Helen had told her stories of how Catherine served as a nurse in the war, how she saved dozens of lives not with a weapon, but with courage and calm hands. She was a legend in their family, a symbol of quiet, unbreakable integrity. She always said that a person's worth isn't in what they have, but in what they are, Helen murmured, more to herself than to Maya. "Character is the only thing you truly own." She then straightened her shoulders, as if drawing strength from the memory. "All right, little star. Let's go." The journey downtown was like traveling to another world. Their quiet, leafy neighborhood gave way to the towering steel and glass giants of the financial district. Helen held Maya's hand tightly as they walked through the grand, marble lobby of the Thornton Industries Tower. The air inside felt different, cold, still, and smelling of money. The security guard, a kind man named Walter with a friendly mustache, smiled when he saw them. "Morning, Helen. And who's this lovely assistant you've brought today?" "This is my daughter, Maya," Helen said. "My sitter was unwell. I hope it's all right." "Of course," Walter said, waving them through. "She'll be a ray of sunshine in this place. Don't you worry." They rode the elevator up to the 50th floor. The ride was silent and fast, making Maya's ears pop. When the doors opened, they stepped into a space that was the exact opposite of their cozy apartment. The floors were polished black stone, the walls were covered in abstract art, and the ceiling was so high it felt like the sky. It was beautiful, but it had no warmth. The conference room was at the end of the hall. It was a cavern of glass, offering a stunning view of the entire city. A long, dark wood table stretched across the room, surrounded by 20 imposing leather chairs. Helen got to work immediately, her movements practiced and swift. She wiped down the table until it shone, adjusted each chair so it was perfectly aligned, and made sure the water pitchers were full and spotless. Maya found a small, out-of-the-way chair in the corner, far from the head of the table. She sat down, opened her coloring book, and chose a bright yellow crayon to begin filling in the sun above her castle. The room was silent except for the soft sounds of her mother's work and the distant hum of the city below. From her corner, she could see everything. She felt like a little mouse, hidden and watching the world of giants. She didn't know that in just a few hours, this very room would become a battlefield, and her quiet, steady presence would be the most powerful weapon of all. Helen finished her work just as the private elevator chimed. "They're here," she whispered, giving Maya's shoulder a gentle squeeze. "Remember, quiet as a mouse." She gave her daughter a reassuring smile before slipping out of the room through a service door, leaving Maya alone in the vast, silent space. Maya kept her head down, her yellow crayon moving in small, even strokes. The main doors to the conference room swung open. The first person to enter was a man who seemed to fill the entire doorway. He was tall and broad, with silver hair and a suit so sharp it looked like it could cut glass. This was Harrison Thornton, the billionaire owner of the company. His face was set in a permanent scowl, as if he was constantly displeased with the world. He didn't seem to notice Maya at all. He strode to the head of the table, placing a leather briefcase down with a loud thud that echoed in the quiet room. He was followed by his wife, Beatrice, a woman who glittered. Her jewelry caught the light, and her perfume filled the air with a heavy, sweet scent. Her eyes, however, were as cold as the glass walls. They were the first to see the small girl in the corner. Beatrice stopped, her perfectly painted lips twisting into a frown of distaste. "Harrison, what is that?" she asked, her voice sharp and loud. She pointed a long, manicured finger directly at Maya. Harrison Thornton finally looked over. His eyes scanned Maya from her simple dress to her worn sneakers. He didn't see a child. He saw something that didn't belong in his world. "It's a child," he grunted, turning to his assistant who had just scurried into the room. "Why is there a child in my boardroom? Did one of the cleaners bring their offspring to work? Get it out of here." The word "it" hung in the air, cold and cruel. Maya's hand froze on her coloring book. She didn't look up, but she could feel their eyes on her. She felt herself shrink, wanting to become even smaller, to disappear into the chair. Her heart started to beat a little faster, a tiny drum against her ribs. Before the assistant could respond, a young man sauntered into the room. He was a younger version of his father, with the same arrogant posture but with a smirk that never left his face. This was Carter, the Thornton's son. Well, what do we have here?" Carter said, walking over to Maya's corner. He loomed over her, casting a shadow on her coloring page. He peered down at her drawing of the castle. "Look at that, playing with crayons. How cute." He reached down and plucked the book from her hands. Maya's head snapped up, her blue eyes wide with alarm. "A castle," Carter said with a mocking laugh, showing the book to his parents. "I suppose this is the biggest house she's ever seen, even on paper." Beatrice let out a tinkling, unpleasant laugh. "Don't be mean, Carter. Her mother probably lives in some dreadful little box. This is a fantasy for her." Harrison Thornton grunted again, his impatience growing. "Enough. The investors will be here any minute. Get rid of the girl and her things." Carter smirked, holding the coloring book just out of Maya's reach as she stood up to get it back. "You want this?" he taunted. Then, with a casual flick of his wrist, he tossed the book onto the floor. The pages splayed open, and the box of crayons spilled out, rolling and scattering under the massive table like tiny, colorful insects. Maya stared at her scattered crayons. She didn't cry. She didn't make a sound. She simply stood there, her small shoulders straight. She remembered her mother's words about Great Aunt Catherine. Character is the only thing you truly own. She wouldn't let them see her crumble. She bent down and began to pick up her crayons, one by one, her movements calm and deliberate. The Thorntons watched her with detached amusement, as if she were a peculiar animal at the zoo. They had no idea that their casual cruelty was being observed. The main doors opened again, and two men entered the room, their expressions serious. These were the investors. The men Harrison Thornton was so desperate to impress. The men who held the fate of a $500 million deal in their hands. The lead investor was Mr. James Peterson, a man in his late 50s with a kind, weathered face and intelligent eyes behind simple glasses. He was known in the business world not just for his wealth, but for his unwavering integrity. His colleague, Ms. Evelyn Albright, was a sharp, observant woman who missed nothing. They paused at the doorway, their eyes taking in the scene. Harrison Thornton looking annoyed, his wife and son smirking, and a small, blonde girl on her hands and knees, quietly picking up crayons from beneath the magnificent boardroom table. A thick, awkward silence fell. Harrison Thornton's face immediately changed, the scowl replaced by a wide, artificial smile. "James, Evelyn, wonderful to see you," he boomed, moving to greet them. "Please, come in, come in. Don't mind the cleanup. Just getting the last specks of dust out of the way before we begin." He shot a venomous glare over their shoulders at Maya, a silent order to vanish. But Mr. Peterson wasn't looking at Harrison. His gaze was fixed on Maya. He watched as she gathered the last of her crayons, placed them neatly back in their box, and returned to her small chair in the corner, her back straight, her dignity intact. He saw the strength in her stillness. It was a quality he recognized. It was a quality he admired above all others. It reminded him of his Aunt Catherine. The meeting was about to begin. But for James Peterson, the most important transaction in the room had already taken place. And it had nothing to do with money. Harrison Thornton, completely oblivious to the shift in the room's atmosphere, launched into his presentation. He was a man who loved the sound of his own voice, and he spoke with a booming confidence that he mistook for leadership. He pointed to charts and graphs projected onto a massive screen, talking about market shares, growth projections, and profit margins. "As you can see," he declared, gesturing grandly, "this partnership isn't just an investment. It's the future. Thornton Industries is on the cusp of dominating the global market, and with your capital, we will be unstoppable." Beatrice and Carter sat on one side of the table, looking bored but supportive. Beatrice would occasionally nod or offer a thin smile, while Carter scrolled through his phone, only looking up when his father said something particularly arrogant. The investors, Mr. Peterson and Ms. Albright, listened politely. Ms. Albright took meticulous notes, her pen scratching quietly on a legal pad. Mr. Peterson, however, was still. His hands were folded on the table, but his attention was divided. Every few moments, his eyes would drift to the small girl sitting silently in the corner. Maya was not looking at the presentation. She had her coloring book open on her lap again, but she wasn't coloring. She was simply holding it, her gaze directed at her worn sneakers. She was trying to make herself invisible, to fold into herself so no one would notice her. Yet, her quiet presence was more noticeable to Mr. Peterson than all of Thornton's loud, boastful words. He saw the tension in her small shoulders and the careful way she held herself, as if bracing for another blow. During a brief pause, as Harrison Thornton took a dramatic sip of water, his wife Beatrice leaned over to him. "That girl is still here," she whispered, her voice a hiss of irritation just loud enough for the investors to hear. "It's distracting. She looks so shabby. It lowers the tone of the room." Harrison shot another dark look toward Maya. He saw the investors' attention waver and wrongly assumed it was because of the distraction his wife had pointed out. He decided to address it, to turn it into a joke, to show how magnanimous he was. It was a terrible miscalculation. Clearing his throat, he said with a forced chuckle, "Please, forgive the small audience we have today." He waved a dismissive hand in Maya's direction. "One of our cleaning staff had a childcare issue. We at Thornton Industries are a family, of course. We look after everyone, right down to the people who scrub our floors. The condescension in his tone was thick enough to taste. Carter snickered into his hand. Ms. Albright's pen stopped moving. She slowly looked up from her notes, her eyes unreadable. Mr. Peterson's expression didn't change, but a muscle in his jaw tightened. Harrison, mistaking their silence for polite interest, continued. It's a good lesson for the child, I think. A chance to see what real success looks like. Something to aspire to, perhaps, so she doesn't have to follow in her mother's footsteps. He smiled, pleased with himself. He thought he sounded generous and inspiring. But Mr. Peterson heard something else entirely. He heard the deep, ugly arrogance of a man who measured human worth in dollars and job titles. He saw a man belittling a child to inflate his own ego. He decided to ask a question, not about the profit margins, but about something far more important. Mr. Thornton, he began, his voice calm and even, cutting through the self-congratulatory air. You speak of success. What does that word mean to you? Harrison was taken aback. It was not the question he was expecting. Mean to me? Well, it's obvious, isn't it? It's this. He spread his arms wide, indicating the room, the view, the company. It's wealth, power, influence, leaving a legacy. I see, Mr. Peterson said softly. He turned his head slightly, his gaze falling once more on Maya. And what about character? Where does that fit into your definition of success? A flicker of annoyance crossed Harrison's face. This was not going according to plan. Character is for Sunday school. This is a boardroom. Here, we talk about results. Numbers. The bottom line. That's the real world. To punctuate his point, he looked directly at Maya. Let me give you a real-world example. That little girl over there. Her mother is a hard worker, I'm sure. But she is a servant. Her daughter, sitting there in that cheap dress, is a servant's kid. That is her station in life. My son, he said, clapping Carter on the shoulder, is the son of a billionaire. He was born to lead. Some people are born to follow, others to serve. That is the natural order of things. The cruelty of the statement was breathtaking. It was no longer a careless insult. It was a declaration of his core beliefs. He was not just mocking a child. He was mocking her entire existence, her mother's hard work, her future. Maya flinched. It was a tiny, almost imperceptible movement, but Mr. Peterson saw it. He saw her knuckles turn white as she gripped her coloring book. He saw the way she bit her lip to keep it from trembling. But her eyes, when she finally lifted her head and looked across the room, were not filled with tears. They were steady, and in them, he saw a flicker of the same defiant strength he had seen in the photograph on his own mantelpiece at home, the photograph of his beloved Aunt Catherine. Ms. Albright slowly closed her notepad. The deal was already dead, and she knew it. The numbers on the screen no longer mattered. Mr. Peterson leaned forward, his voice dropping to a quiet, serious tone. Let me tell you about a woman I knew, Mr. Thornton. She was never a billionaire. She never owned a company. For most of her life, she wore a simple nurse's uniform. By your definition, she was a servant. He paused, letting his words sink in. The room was utterly silent, save for the hum of the air conditioner. This woman, he continued, served in 2 wars. She ran into danger when everyone else was running away. She held the hands of dying soldiers and saved the lives of countless others with nothing but her skill, her courage, and the power of her character. She never had much money, but she had more honor, more integrity, and more worth in her little finger than a man like you could ever comprehend. Harrison Thornton's face had turned a pale, blotchy red. What does this have to do with anything? He stammered. Mr. Peterson ignored him. He looked past the furious billionaire, his eyes finding Maya's. He gave her a small, gentle smile. That woman was my aunt, he said, his voice full of warmth and respect. And she taught me that the natural order of things has nothing to do with the money in your bank account. It has to do with how you treat people, especially those who have less power than you do. He then stood up, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the polished table. Ms. Albright rose with him. Mr. Thornton, Mr. Peterson said, his voice now firm and clear, ringing with finality. We are no longer interested in this deal. We cannot, in good conscience, invest in a company led by a man with such a profound poverty of character. He turned his back on the stunned billionaire and walked toward the corner of the room where Maya sat, frozen in her chair. He knelt down in front of her, so they were at eye level. His movements were slow and gentle, as if approaching a frightened bird. "What's your name, little one?" he asked kindly. Maya hesitated for a second, then found her voice. It was small but clear. "Maya," she whispered. "That's a beautiful name, Maya," he said. "My name is James. It's very nice to meet you." He glanced at the picture of the castle in her lap. "That's a fine-looking castle. Does it have a name?" Maya shook her head. "Well," Mr. Peterson said with a twinkle in his eye, "every strong castle needs a strong name. How about Fortitude?" Maya looked at him, a glimmer of a smile touching her lips for the first time. Behind them, the world of Harrison Thornton was beginning to crumble. He stood speechless, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. Beatrice looked horrified, her perfectly made-up face a mask of shock. Carter had finally put his phone down, his usual smirk replaced by a look of utter disbelief. "You can't be serious." Harrison finally sputtered, finding his voice. "Over a child? A servant's kid? This is a $500 million deal." Mr. Peterson stood up and turned to face him, his expression now cold as steel. "You are mistaken, Mr. Thornton," he said, his voice echoing in the silent room. "You think this is about her. It is not. It is about you. You have shown us who you are today, and we don't invest in men like you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple, elegant business card. He walked back to Maya and handed it to her. "Maya," he said softly, "please give this to your mother. Tell her James Peterson would be honored to speak with her." With a final, dismissive glance at the Thorntons, Mr. Peterson and Ms. Albright walked out of the conference room, the doors swinging shut behind them with a quiet, decisive click. For a long moment, no one moved. The presentation still glowed on the screen, a monument to a future that had just vanished. Then, Harrison Thornton let out a roar of fury. He swept a stack of papers off the table, sending them flying across the room. "Do you know what you've done?" he screamed, though it wasn't clear who he was yelling at. His wife? His son? Or the small, silent girl in the corner who had brought his empire to its knees without saying a word? Maya clutched the business card in her hand. It felt heavy, important. She looked from the enraged billionaire to the closed doors where the kind man had disappeared. And in that moment, she understood the lesson her mother had tried to teach her, the one passed down from her great-aunt Catherine. True strength wasn't loud. It wasn't mean or boastful. It was quiet. It was steady. And it was more powerful than all the money in the world. The silence that followed the investor's departure was heavier and more crushing than the billionaire's rage. It pressed down on the room, suffocating the last of the afternoon light that streamed through the glass walls. Harrison Thornton stood panting, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. The scattered papers at his feet were like fallen leaves after a storm, the remnants of a future that had just been torn apart. Beatrice was the first to speak, her voice a high-pitched, trembling thing. "Harrison, what just happened? Did they really just leave? Over that child?" She gestured toward Maya, her hand shaking so much her bracelets rattled like a frightened snake. "He called me a man with a poverty of character," Harrison bellowed, slamming his fist on the table. The sound cracked through the room, making Maya jump. "Me? Harrison Thornton? After everything I've built? Destroyed by a cleaner's brat?" He rounded on Maya, his eyes blazing with a terrible fire. For a moment, she thought he might lunge at her. He took a step forward, his finger jabbing in her direction. You did this. Sitting there with your pathetic little drawings. You brought this curse into my boardroom." Carter, who had been silent until now, finally spoke up, a whine in his voice. "Dad, it wasn't her. It was that old guy. He was weird. Going on about his aunt or something." "Don't be a fool, Carter." Harrison snapped, turning his rage on his son. "It's about appearances. Perception. We looked weak, having her in here. It made us look charitable. And nobody invests $500 million in charity." Just then, the service door opened, and Helen stepped back into the room. She held a fresh bottle of cleaning spray, ready to do a final check. She stopped dead, her eyes widening at the scene before her. The scattered papers, Mr. Thornton's terrifying expression, her daughter standing small and pale in the corner. Is everything all right, Mr. Thornton?" she asked, her voice faltering. Harrison whirled around to face her. "All right," he roared, his voice dripping with venom. "No, Helen, everything is not all right. In fact, everything is ruined. And it's all your fault." Helen shrank back, clutching the bottle to her chest like a shield. My fault, sir. I don't understand. You brought your child to my office, he yelled, stalking toward her. On the day of the most important meeting of my life. Her presence, her poverty, it cost me everything. Beatrice joined the assault, her voice sharp and cruel. We have rules, Helen. This is a place of business, not a daycare. But I suppose we can't expect people like you to understand professionalism. Helen looked from their twisted faces to her daughter. She saw the fear in Maya's eyes, but she also saw that same quiet strength, that refusal to break. It gave her courage. She straightened her back, her own resolve hardening. I am a professional, Mrs. Thornton, she said, her voice low but steady. I have worked for this company for 8 years. I have never missed a day. I have never been late. My work has always been perfect. Today my sitter was ill. I had no choice. I made sure my daughter would be no trouble. No trouble. Harrison laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. She just cost me $500 million. I call that trouble. You're fired, Helen. Get your things and get out of my building. And take your little curse with you. Helen flinched as if struck. Fired. After 8 years of loyal service. 8 years of scrubbing floors on her hands and knees. Of being invisible. Of making sure their world was polished and perfect. All of it was gone in an instant. But as she looked at her daughter, a strange sense of calm washed over her. She realized Harrison Thornton had not just fired her. He had freed her. Very well, Mr. Thornton, she said with a dignity that seemed to shock him into silence. She walked over to Maya, her steps even and unhurried. She knelt down, ignoring the furious billionaire and his family. She looked into her daughter's eyes. Are you okay, my star? She asked softly. Maya didn't answer with words. She simply held up her small hand. In her palm was the business card. Helen took it, her brow furrowing as she read the name, James Peterson. Below it was a phone number. Helen looked at Maya, a question in her eyes. Maya just nodded, a small, certain gesture. Helen stood up, holding her daughter's hand tightly. She didn't look at the Thorntons again. She simply turned and walked toward the main doors of the conference room, her back straight. She led Maya out of the room of glass and rage, leaving the Thorntons standing amidst the wreckage of their own making. Their walk through the vast, empty office was silent. The marble floors echoed with their footsteps. They rode the elevator down 50 floors, the city lights beginning to sparkle in the twilight. When they stepped out into the lobby, Walter, the security guard, saw them. Leaving so soon, Helen? He asked with his usual friendly smile. But the smile faded when he saw her face, the tightness around her eyes. Is everything all right? I've been let go, Walter, Helen said, her voice surprisingly even. Walter's face fell. Oh, Helen, I'm so sorry. That's not right. You're the best worker they've got. Thank you, Walter, she said, squeezing his arm. You be well. As they walked out of the revolving glass doors and onto the bustling sidewalk, the cool evening air felt like a cleansing breath. The city was alive with sounds, the rumble of the subway beneath their feet, the distant wail of a siren, the chatter of people heading home. It was the sound of the real world, a world away from the cold, sterile silence of the tower. They didn't speak on the bus ride home. Helen stared out the window, the city lights blurring past. She held the business card in her hand, the sharp edges pressing into her palm. She replayed the scene in her mind, the insults, the fury, the final, dismissive word, fired. A quiet anger began to simmer beneath her shock. It wasn't just for herself. It was for Maya. They had tried to humiliate her child, to make her feel small and worthless. They had failed. When they got back to their small, warm apartment, the scent of lemon polish and home welcomed them. Helen went through the motions of their evening routine, but her mind was miles away. She made Maya a sandwich for dinner, but she couldn't eat a bite herself. After Maya was tucked into bed, Helen sat at the small kitchen table, the business card lying in front of her. James Peterson. He was the investor. The man who had walked away from $500 million. The man who had defended her daughter. Her hand trembled as she reached for the phone. What would she say? Hello, my daughter was humiliated in your meeting, and I was fired. Can you help me? It sounded desperate. Pathetic. She thought of Great Aunt Catherine. Of the stories of her calm resolve in the face of chaos and fear. Catherine would not have hesitated. She would have acted. Taking a deep breath, Helen dialed the number. She expected a secretary, an automated menu, a voicemail. But a man answered on the second ring. His voice was calm and kind. James Peterson speaking. Helen's breath caught in her throat. Mr. Peterson? My name is Helen. I'm Maya's mother. There was a pause on the other end, and then the voice warmed even more. Helen, I'm so glad you called. I was hoping you would. First, please, tell me, are you and your daughter all right? The simple, genuine concern in his voice was almost her undoing. Tears pricked at the back of her eyes, but she forced them back. We are, thank you. We're home now. I am so deeply sorry for what you and Maya were forced to witness today, he said, his voice laced with sincere regret. No child should ever be spoken to that way. No person should. Mr. Thornton, he fired me, Helen said, the words coming out in a rush. I am not surprised, Mr. Peterson said, a hard edge to his voice. But you should not worry about Harrison Thornton for another minute. A man like that builds his house on sand, and the tide is coming in. He paused. Helen, the reason I gave Maya my card was not out of pity. It was out of respect. I saw in your daughter a strength and dignity that her mockers could never understand. That kind of character is not an accident. It is taught. It is nurtured. It comes from her mother. Helen was speechless. I have a proposition for you, he continued. It's not a handout. It's a job offer. My own executive assistant is retiring at the end of the month. It's a demanding position, but it pays well and has excellent benefits. The most important qualifications for the job are not a fancy degree or a long resume. They are integrity, discretion, and character, qualities which I believe you possess in abundance. Would you be willing to come in for an interview on Monday? Helen sank into her chair, the phone pressed hard against her ear. An interview, a job, a new life, offered to her in the wreckage of the old one. It felt impossible, like a dream, but the kind voice on the other end of the line was real. Yes, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Yes, Mr. Peterson, I would. Wonderful, he said. And Helen, please tell Maya that I believe her castle should be named Fortitude, because that's what she showed today. And that is a power no bully can ever take away. After they hung up, Helen sat in the quiet of her kitchen for a long time, the city lights twinkling outside her window. The fear and anger had been washed away, replaced by a rising tide of hope. She thought of the Thornton family, alone in their cold, glass tower, surrounded by wealth but bankrupt in spirit. And she thought of herself and Maya, in their small, humble apartment, with very little money but rich in what truly mattered. The battle had been won, not with shouting or with power, but with the quiet, unbreakable strength of a 10-year-old girl and the enduring legacy of a woman who knew that true worth is not what you own, but what you are. The Thorntons had tried to put them in their place, but they had only succeeded in helping them find a much, much better one. The weekend passed in a haze of quiet anticipation. On Monday morning, Helen woke before the sun, a nervous energy buzzing beneath her skin. She chose her best blouse and a simple, dark skirt, the only professional outfit she owned. It was clean and pressed, but she worried it wasn't good enough. As she looked at her reflection, she saw the faint lines of worry around her eyes. Maya came and stood beside her, looking up at her mother's reflection in the mirror. You look beautiful, Mama, she said, her voice soft. Helen smiled and squeezed her daughter's shoulder. Thank you, my star. I'm a little nervous. You don't have to be, Maya said with a certainty that surprised Helen. Mr. James is a good man. He saw you, not just the cleaning spray, out of the mouths of babes. Maya's simple wisdom settled Helen's nerves. Her daughter was right. Mr. Peterson wasn't looking for a fancy suit. He was looking for character. And that was something Helen had in spades. Mr. Peterson's office was in a different part of the city, in a building that was older, built of stone and brick, with a quiet elegance that spoke of old money and established prestige, not the flashy, brittle newness of the Thornton Tower. The lobby was warm, with wood paneling and soft lighting. When Helen gave her name to the receptionist, she was shown in immediately. James Peterson's office was not what she expected. It was large, but it wasn't intimidating. One wall was filled floor to ceiling with books. Another had large windows that overlooked a small city park. The desk was large but cluttered with papers and photographs. It was the office of a man who worked, not one who just sat and gave orders. Mr. Peterson rose from his desk as she entered, a warm, genuine smile on his face. He was dressed in a simple suit, no flashy watch or cufflinks. Helen, thank you for coming. Please have a seat. The interview was less of an interview and more of a conversation. He didn't ask her about her typing speed or her experience with scheduling software. He asked about her life, about Maya, about what she valued. He told her about his company, about the importance of treating every employee, from the executive to the mailroom clerk, with respect. A company is a community, he explained, leaning forward, his eyes earnest. If the foundation is rotten, the whole structure will eventually collapse, no matter how shiny the windows are. I saw Harrison Thornton's foundation on Saturday. It was pure rot. He then told her a story that made everything click into place. The aunt I mentioned, he said, gesturing to a framed photograph on his desk, the nurse. Her name was Catherine. She was my great-aunt, actually. My mother's aunt. A true legend in our family. Helen's heart gave a jolt. Catherine, she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Yes, Catherine Peterson, he said, looking at the photo with deep affection. She passed away a few years ago. She was the moral compass for our entire family. Helen felt a dizzying sense of connection, a feeling that fate was weaving a thread she couldn't see. Mr. Peterson, she said slowly, my great-aunt was also a war nurse. A hero in our family. Her name was Catherine, too. James Peterson looked at her, his eyebrows raised in surprise. What was her last name? Miller, Helen replied. Catherine Miller. A look of dawning recognition spread across James's face. He stood up and walked to a bookshelf, pulling down a thick, leather-bound photo album. He flipped through a few pages and then brought it over to Helen, pointing to a black-and-white photograph. The picture showed a group of young nurses in their crisp uniforms, standing in front of a medical tent. They were smiling, despite the exhaustion in their eyes. In the center of the group were two women, their arms linked. One was a younger version of the woman in the photo on James's desk. The other, Helen gasped. It was the same woman from the photograph in her own living room. Her great-aunt Catherine. They were best friends, James said softly, a note of awe in his voice. Catherine Miller. My aunt talked about her all the time. She called her Millie. She said Millie was the bravest person she ever knew. They served together for 3 years. They saved each other's lives more than once. Helen stared at the photograph, her mind reeling. The two Catherines. Two quiet heroes from two different families, linked by courage and friendship decades ago. And now, their descendants were sitting in an office, brought together by an act of cruelty and a child's quiet dignity. It was almost too much to comprehend. It seems, James said, his voice thick with emotion, that our families were meant to cross paths again. He closed the album gently. Helen, the job is yours if you want it. It would be an honor to work with a member of Catherine Miller's family. Helen accepted, her heart so full she could barely speak. She started the following week. The work was challenging, but she was a fast learner. For the first time in her life, she felt seen. Her opinions were valued. Her intelligence was respected. She wasn't just the woman who cleaned the floors. She was Helen, the capable and indispensable executive assistant to the CEO. Meanwhile, the fallout at Thornton Industries was catastrophic. The story of the disastrous meeting leaked. An anonymous source, Ms. Albright, perhaps, told a reporter from a major business journal about the billionaire who mocked a cleaner's child and lost a $500 million investment because of his poverty of character. The phrase went viral. Harrison Thornton became a symbol of corporate arrogance and cruelty. His company's stock plummeted. Other investors got nervous and started pulling out. He was forced to issue a public apology, a stiff, insincere statement that only made things worse. Carter's and Beatrice's names were dragged through the mud in gossip columns and on social media. The Thornton family, who had lived their lives in a bubble of wealth and privilege, were suddenly exposed to the harsh judgment of the world they so despised. Their empire, built on a rotten foundation, was beginning to crumble. About a month after starting her new job, Helen received a package at the office. It was a large, flat box. When she opened it, she found a beautifully framed, professional portrait. It was a drawing of a magnificent castle, strong and proud, with a bright yellow sun shining over it. At the bottom, in elegant script, were the words, Fortitude Castle. It was Maya's drawing, the one from the coloring book, expertly rendered and preserved. Attached was a note from James Peterson. It read, Helen, a reminder of the day a queen and a princess taught a fool a lesson about the true meaning of power. Thank you, James. That evening, Helen hung the picture in their living room, right next to the photograph of her great-aunt Catherine. The two images, the uniformed nurse and the child's drawing, seemed to belong together. They were symbols of the same thing, a quiet, unyielding strength that could face down any darkness and emerge, not only unbroken, but victorious. Maya stood beside her, looking up at her drawing. "It looks like a real castle now, Mama," she said. "It always was, my star," Helen replied, pulling her into a hug. "It always was." In the end, the Thorntons' grand glass tower was just a building. It was cold, empty, and fragile. But Maya's castle, built with crayons and courage, and defended by love and integrity, that was a fortress. And it would stand forever. The weeks that followed were a slow, public unraveling for the Thornton family. The phrase, poverty of character, clung to Harrison Thornton like a second skin. It was the headline of the Business Journal article, the punchline in late-night monologues, the hashtag that trended for days on social media. His carefully constructed image as a titan of industry was shattered, replaced by a caricature of a cruel, out-of-touch bully. Harrison tried to fight it. He hired a high-priced public relations firm that advised him to go on a humility tour. He sat for a painfully awkward television interview, his face caked in makeup, his smile as artificial as the potted plant on the set next to him. He spoke of his deep regret and his commitment to learning, but his eyes were cold and dead. The public saw right through it. The host asked him, point blank, "Mr. Thornton, have you reached out to the mother and child you publicly humiliated?" Harrison stammered, caught off guard. My people have made attempts to locate them, to offer compensation." It was a lie. He had done nothing but rage within the walls of his penthouse. The host's polite smile didn't waver, but her follow-up was devastating. "So, you haven't spoken to them yourself? You haven't apologized to a 10-year-old girl for calling her a curse?" The clip went viral, sealing his fate as a pariah. The financial consequences were swift and brutal. The stock price of Thornton Industries, once a symbol of unshakable strength, now fell daily. Board members, facing pressure from their own circles, began to distance themselves. Longtime business partners suddenly found reasons to delay or cancel contracts. The $500 million deal with James Peterson's firm had been a linchpin for a massive expansion project. Without that capital, the entire project collapsed, taking with it the promise of future profits and the company's reputation for infallible success. The rot spread to the family's personal lives. Beatrice, who lived for her status in the city's high society, found her invitations drying up. The charity board she sat on suddenly requested her resignation, citing vague scheduling conflicts. Her friends, the wives of other powerful men, would offer tight, pitying smiles at the few events she dared to attend, whispering behind their hands the moment she passed. She was no longer the queen bee. She was a cautionary tale. Her glittering world had become a lonely, gilded cage. Carter suffered a different kind of humiliation. His friends, the sons of other wealthy families, began to mock him, calling him Prince Poverty. His casual arrogance, once seen as a sign of his birthright, now seemed pathetic. A video surfaced of him from a party a year earlier, drunkenly pushing a waiter. In the past, it would have been ignored. Now, it was seen as proof of the rotten apple not falling far from the tree. His father, in a desperate attempt to show the world he was making changes, fired his own son from his cushy, do-nothing job at the company. Carter, who had never worked a real day in his life, was cast adrift, his allowance cut, his future uncertain. The Thornton penthouse, once a hub of power and influence, became a tomb. The three of them would drift through the cavernous rooms, the silence broken only by the sound of Harrison's furious phone calls or Beatrice's quiet weeping. They turned on each other, their conversations laced with blame and resentment. "This is your fault, Harrison," Beatrice would cry. "Your ego. You couldn't just leave the child alone." "My fault," he'd roar back. "You're the one who called her shabby. You're the one who couldn't stand the sight of a poor person in your precious boardroom." Carter would just retreat to his room, blasting music to drown out the sound of his parents' crumbling marriage and his own shattered pride. Their wealth had been the glue that held them together, and now that it was threatened, the family was coming apart at the seams. Miles away, in a different world entirely, Helen and Maya were building a new life. Helen's job was everything she had secretly hoped for and more. The Peterson Corporation was a stark contrast to Thornton Industries. Here, people smiled in the hallways. Mr. Peterson knew the names of the janitorial staff. There was a sense of shared purpose, of mutual respect, that Helen had never experienced in a workplace before. She thrived. Her natural quietness was seen not as meekness, but as thoughtfulness. Her organizational skills, honed by years of managing a household on a shoestring budget, were impeccable. She anticipated Mr. Peterson's needs, managed his chaotic schedule with calm efficiency, and quickly earned his complete trust. The steady, generous paycheck changed everything. For the first time, Helen didn't have to check the price of every single item at the grocery store. She could buy Maya a new pair of shoes without waiting for a sale. One day, she surprised Maya by signing her up for art classes, something Maya had only dreamed of. Watching her daughter stand in front of an easel, a smudge of blue paint on her nose, and a look of pure joy on her face, brought tears to Helen's eyes. This was what she had worked so hard for. Not just survival, but the chance for her daughter to flourish. Their small apartment, once just a place of refuge, became a true home filled with laughter and the scent of new possibilities. Maya's artwork began to fill the walls, bright, hopeful paintings of landscapes and animals, and of course, castles. Fortitude Castle was a recurring theme, each version a little stronger, a little grander than the last. James Peterson became a quiet presence in their lives. He would often ask Helen how Maya was doing, his interest genuine. Learning about her love for art, he arranged for them to have a private tour of the city's art museum, led by the chief curator herself. As Maya stood in front of a giant, famous painting, her eyes wide with wonder, Helen looked over at James, who was watching the scene with a grandfatherly smile. She felt a wave of gratitude so powerful it almost knocked her off her feet. He hadn't just given her a job, he had given them back their dignity. He had shown them kindness when they were at their most vulnerable, and it had changed the entire trajectory of their lives. One afternoon, a few months into her new role, James called Helen into his office. His expression was serious. "Helen, I have some news," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "I've just come from a meeting with my bankers. It seems Thornton Industries is on the verge of total collapse. They are selling off assets to stay afloat. And one of the assets they've put on the market is the Thornton Tower itself." Helen listened, her heart still. The glass tower, the scene of their greatest humiliation and their unexpected salvation. "My real estate division has looked at the numbers," James continued. "It's a prime piece of property, and they're selling it for a fraction of its worth. We're going to buy it." Helen blinked, unsure of how to react. James leaned forward, a thoughtful look on his face. "A building is just a building, Helen. It's the people inside that give it its character. That tower has been a symbol of arrogance for too long. I'd like to turn it into a symbol of something else." He paused, then added, "The 50th floor, the executive suite. I'm going to be turning it into a nonprofit foundation. A foundation dedicated to providing educational scholarships and opportunities for underprivileged children in this city." He let the words sink in. "And I need someone to run it. A director. Someone with integrity, compassion, and firsthand knowledge of the struggles these families face. Someone who understands the importance of character over capital." He looked directly at Helen. "I want you to be the executive director of the Peterson Foundation." Helen was stunned into silence. Her, the former cleaner, running a multi-million-dollar foundation? It seemed impossible. "Mr. Peterson, James, I don't know what to say. I don't have the experience. I didn't even go to college." "You have a PhD in life, Helen," he said gently. "You have raised an extraordinary daughter on your own. You have faced down bullies and navigated hardship with a grace I have seldom seen. You are the most qualified person I know." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city. "That office, where Harrison Thornton tried to make your daughter feel small, will become a place where children like her are given the tools to grow as big as their dreams. There is a beautiful justice in that, don't you think?" Tears streamed down Helen's face, but for the first time in a long, long time, they were tears of pure joy. She thought of her great-aunt Catherine, who had spent her life helping others. She thought of Maya, and of all the other Mayas in the city, quiet children with big hearts and bigger dreams, who just needed a chance. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and strong, the voice of a director. "Yes, I will." A few weeks later, on a crisp autumn afternoon, Helen found herself riding the silent, swift elevator up to the 50th floor of the newly renamed Peterson Tower. This time, she wasn't wearing a cleaner's uniform. She was wearing a smart, professional suit, a gift from James. And she wasn't alone. She was holding Maya's hand. When the doors opened, the floor looked different. The cold, abstract art was gone, replaced with bright, cheerful paintings. The imposing black furniture was being moved out. Workers were measuring walls, planning for a new, more welcoming design. Helen led Maya down the hall to the glass conference room. It was empty now. The long, dark table was gone. The 20 imposing chairs were gone. It was just a large, open space, filled with sunlight. They walked to the corner where Maya had once sat, trying to make herself invisible. Now, they stood in the center of the room, looking out at the sprawling city below. It didn't look so intimidating anymore. It looked full of promise. "This whole room, Mama?" Maya asked, her voice full of awe. "This is your new office." "Our new office," Helen corrected her gently. "This is where we are going to help a lot of children, my star. We're going to build new castles for them." As they stood there, a movement at the far end of the floor caught Helen's eye. A man was being escorted out by security. He was stooped, his shoulders slumped in defeat. His suit, though expensive, was rumpled. It was Harrison Thornton, there to collect the last of his personal effects. He saw them. For a brief, terrible moment, his eyes met Helen's across the vast, empty space. She saw no anger in his gaze anymore, just a hollow, echoing emptiness. The look of a man who had everything, and now had nothing. He shuffled away, a ghost in the monument to his own hubris, not even a shadow of the titan who had once roared in that very room. Maya tugged on her mother's hand. "Mama, look." She pointed to the glass wall. The setting sun had hit the window just right, creating a prism of light, a rainbow that stretched across the empty floor, bathing the room in brilliant, hopeful color. Helen squeezed her daughter's hand, her heart full. The Thorntons had tried to define them by their station, to trap them in a story of servitude and shame. But they had written their own story instead, a story of quiet strength, of unexpected kindness, and of the simple, unshakable truth that a person's character is the only castle that can never be torn down. And in that sun-filled room, high above the city, their new chapter was just beginning. And that's where we'll end the story for now. Whenever I share one of these, I hope it gives you a chance to step out of the everyday and just drift for a bit. I'd love to know what you were doing while listening. Maybe relaxing after work, on a late-night drive, or just winding down. Drop a line in the comments. I really do read them all. And if you want to make sure we cross paths again, hitting like and subscribing makes a huge difference. We are always trying to improve our stories, so feel free to also drop your feedback in the comment section below. Thanks for spending this time with me.